So I've been growing this one, um, and maybe I've been a bit hesitant with it in some ways because it's one of the big ones, and there are a lot of opinions about it. But then again, nobody watches these videos, so I can say whatever I want. um, One of the benefits of not promoting yourself. Uh, yeah, it's fantasy. And most people kind of know the basics, that it's a bunch of myths and fairy tales and folklore and stuff that kind of got sifted through a filter called J.R.R. Tolkien, as he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which means that fantasy essentially is one big potpourri of tidbits from folklore around the world, which doesn't really say much as a genre. So the lucky thing is that it has been both refined and expanded upon over the decades since Tolkien's opus came out, was published. I think it's supposed to be called. Since Lord of the Rings, especially The Hobbit to a lesser degree, but Lord of the Rings especially, since they were that was published. And today we have a kind of idea what fantasy is, but it's become so broad and varied that I am going to split it up extensively into both variants and subgenres and some genres that are kind of crossovery with other genres that have nothing to do with fantasy really. So what I'll start with is what we could perhaps call classic fantasy. I may even title this classic fantasy. I haven't decided yet. But classic fantasy is the idea of a simplified, often romanticized Middle Ages with magical elements added in, both in the form of actual magic and in the form of supernatural creatures of many, many kinds. Unlike the supernatural genre, the supernatural creatures of fantasy are not usually considered an outside force entirely, especially not an outside hostile force. This is not just about ghouls and ghosts, but also about entire civilizations of non human creatures, non human civilized creatures, or at least social creatures, non human, non animal beings. The classics are the dwarfs and elves, and on the slightly darker side, orcs, sometimes with goblins and the like added, sometimes with the fae or fairy added, who are often treated like an even more different kind of fantasy creature, more different than elves or dwarves, who are usually just, or not just, but are usually at their core a variant of human beings, while fae or fairy are often far more an expression of nature and magical stuff. Elves can be that as well. There tends to be a kind of gray zone between elves and fae or fairies. Um, But yeah, that's what people usually just associate with it. And if you're not doing a very deep kind of fantasy, you can just stick to that. And these other species or races are quirky in their own way, often have their own conflicts, often stick to their themselves. You have human nations, you have elvish nations, you have dwarven nations, and the Fae and Fairy again are usually a bit special in that they have this kind of otherworldly nations that aren't on a typical map. And then you have the magic, which is a wide topic in itself, but the usual kinds of magic are spells, which are something that people with the right abilities can cast independently of anything else. Enchanted items, which are items that most or anyone can use, uh, that have a narrow set of magical spells in them. So anyone with a basic wand of fireball, just to take something very, very, very basic, could use a wand to cast firebolt, but they couldn't use the wand to extinguish fire, for example. Someone who knew fire magic might be able to both cast fireballs, extinguish fire, and stuff like that, but an enchanted item is an enchanted item, and it is what it is. It doesn't suddenly expand because you need it, unless it's one of those stories where the magic item can do anything the plot needs. But we're not going into that. Those are the two most common. Then you have um, things like alchemy, which is essentially magic for people who do not have the ability to cast spells but have the knowledge to mix things together to get an effect. And a variant of that is artificing, which is more the mechanical version of it, building things, putting solid things together rather than mixing potions. And you have various kinds of magic that are somewhere in the gray zone between being an item for any or most people to use and spells that you need the right abilities to cast. You have magical places, which are essentially magical items that do not move. You have. Oh, I just had it in my head for crying out loud. Oh, yeah, you have magical rituals, which are essentially like casting spells, but you don't need to be magical to do it. You just need to know the ritual. So you can essentially do it IKEA style. Just get the right kind of things, get the right kind of instructions, and then you can cast a spell without being actually a sorcerer. And you also have divine and spiritual magic. Divine magic being usually some variant of powerful creatures that, or powerful beings, I should perhaps say, um, not always physical beings, but powerful entities that grant magical abilities permanently or temporarily to whomever behaves in a way that they agree with. That could mean someone going out and sowing the seeds of chaos for a chaos demon, or it could be someone helping the poor for some kind of benevolent Samaritan deity. And spirits are kind of the same, except the spirits are usually more grounded in that it's either a trade off with them or negotiation or or it's simple manipulation, the same way you'd manipulate animals or dumb people um, into doing your bidding. But since they are spirits, it takes the form of magic. If you got a spirit lifting something, you're levitating something. If you just paid some local peasant to lift something, then you're just hiring someone for manual labor. So there are various ways of explaining magic, but these cover the basics at least, and most things are variants of some of these. It can be very complex. Magic can be something that is restricted to certain beings of a higher nature. Maybe humans cannot perform magic, maybe only elves can, or maybe only fairies can, or maybe there is some special magic that is only humans, and other magic that is fairy or elvish magic, and so on. Maybe some artifacts can only be used by certain kinds of people. Um, the old classic is good people can use good artifacts, evil people can use evil artifacts. But those are considered slightly crude by many fans of the genre. So there's usually a more precise explanation for it, such as instead of good, it's a benevolent deity who supports life and helps people, while evil is just someone who spreads destruction and decay. The old black and white morals are considered a bit outdated by many, but they're not impossible. It's just opinions, all of it. But fantasy has, in many cases, moved away from that. So we got magic and we got strange creatures and ethereal beings in a simplified medieval setting. But that is just the stage dressing in many ways. A fantasy story that is based entirely around these things could basically be a carbon copy of any other story with the magic just put in to replace technology or other tools. So instead of having a laser blaster, you have a wand that casts fireballs, throws fireballs, shoots fireballs, whatever. And instead of a magical teleportation or a technological teleportation beam, you have a magical teleportation spell. Stuff like that. But fantasy, when done in a more, I'm not sure if deep is the right kind of word, but in a more fantasy way, tends to have other specific things to it that go outside many other genres. One thing that seems to be a very strong theme in fantasy, classic fantasy at least, and I mean classic as in the old classic fantasy stories, is the idea that simple, grounded, um, often more physical things are good, whereas lofty, complex, and less tangible things represent, at best, something cynical, cold, and distant, and at worst, pure evil. Magic is often seen as dangerous and evil and corrupting. It destroys people when they use it, or it destroys everything around them because it's so hard to use in a safe way. And sorcerers are often depicted as villains, especially powerful ones, in a version of technology corrupts, or power corrupts, which is something found in many genres. Um, a lot of superhero stories have the idea of technology corrupting, and a lot of stories of any kind has have the idea that power corrupts. And magic, in many ways, is the ultimate expression of power. It's something often very personal, especially if it's a sorcerer, because you can steal a magic wand, but you cannot steal someone's ability to cast a spell, at least not through usual means. So it's very personal, and it's anchored to someone, making it truly their power. And the whole power corrupts is a very common trait. The flip side of it is the simplicity of good, which usually is expressed by heroes being very simple folk, if not actual living of the land folk like farmers or simple townsfolk. They are often barbarians or other primitive people, or they are simply very visually understandable people, such as fighters or blacksmiths or thieves, even people that their skills are very grounded. Their skills are very easy to visualize. They are they are not complex, they are not intangible, they are not abstract. They are in many ways the salt of the earth, even if they're not always good, honest people. They are more quote unquote heroic than some conniving, semi powerful, abstract sorcerer thingy using weird rituals and strange components that nobody really understands. Fantasy is very much a conservative genre at heart, in that the strange is often the dangerous, and the simple and understandable is good. Safe is good, which might harken back to the folklore roots of people living in small communities and being scared of nature and the chaotic world outside, which was a very big reality that back then. But in the stories, it can come off as somewhat narrow minded if you're not aware of it. If you are aware of it and play into it, you can make it work. The idea that large organizations doing weird stuff with strange abilities should be the villains is not that hard to imagine, but it needs to be done right. Otherwise, it's just, yeah, strange things are bad. So that's a very big part of fantasy. Another big part of fantasy is something that stems from the actual Middle Ages, in that the idea is that there are huge powers right outside the reach of most normal societies. And some of those powers are gods and magical beings, like already discussed. But other powers are distant empires, or even lost empires that are not distant physically but distant in time. The ruins of lost empires is often considered a version of the Middle Ages and their ruins of the Roman Empire. The Middle Ages are called the Middle Ages because they're in the middle between the fall of Rome and the rise of the Renaissance age. So the idea that something grand and mighty has come and gone, or that something grand and mighty exists far away, is a very common element in fantasy. And this kind of plays off on the whole complexity is evil thing, in that some things, if they are simple and easy to understand, even though they are grand and powerful, may be good. Like someone heroically, some empire heroically defending the world against dark, dark things. But that empire would be straightforward, usually a direct monarchy with a king who rules, and that's that. No complex politics or anything like that. Whereas evil empires often have a lot of conniving political infighting and intrigue and stuff like that. If there's intrigue in a good empire, it's usually because they want to usurp the king and stop the empire from being simple and good. And the same goes for ancient empires. If they are no longer there, good empires, good ancient empires, or good lost empires are typically very easy to understand, often having a single or few gods or mighty kings that they more or less worshipped, and then just spreading out and doing good. Whereas evil lost empires, were often very complex and hard to understand and have a lot of secrets. Secrets are complex and therefore tend to fall into the evil category. So that is a very, very brief and very, very filtered concept of what classic fantasy is. The grounded, down to earth, soul of the earth kind of people are usually the good guys. The complex and hard to understand things are usually evil. And outside your grounded, down to earth home village or wherever you live dwells a lot of stuff that is very scary, very dangerous, and often very evil, except when it's something that is clearly simple and easy to grasp. And yes, you can twist any of those things around and make fantasy that is subversive, like the simple, seemingly benevolent kingdom that is actually evil, or the big, great, complex, magically infused bureaucracy that is trying to do good. But it will often make it feel less like fantasy and more like a fantasy inspired subgenre, which we will get into.